I'm Mark Dawson from the Self-Publishing Show, and this is Self-Publishing Spotlight, where we shine a light on the indie authors who are changing the world of publishing, one book at a time.
Hello and welcome to the Self-Publishing Spotlight. We meet indie authors at all stages of their careers and ask them a series of 5 questions. 5 questions about their process, their mistakes and their successes, 5 answers that will help you level up your own author career. My name's Tom Ashford and I'm part of the Self-Publishing Formula. Don't forget that you can get your self-publishing resource kit at selfpublishingformula.com/starter kit. This week's guest is PJ Skinner. She's written 6 books in the thriller genre and she lives in England. Welcome, PJ.
Thank you very much.
So would you like to start by talking about the books that you've got in the thriller genre?
Yes, I've written a series of 6 standalone books. They're written like classic adventures, so they would be somewhere between Indiana Jones and Wilbur Smith. They're based on my 30 years working in various jungles and remote sites in Africa and South America. They have a female protagonist who can't help getting herself into trouble. So she's a geologist by trade, and she ends up in all sorts of peculiar places, which is where the adventures start. So the geology is really a vehicle to get her to the places where she has her adventures. That
sounds very cool. So what was the reason for you being in the jungle in the first place?
Well, I'm an exploration geologist. So I go into the jungle and look for metals, gold, silver, copper, iron, things like that.
That is very cool.
Lots of diamonds.
Nice. Okay, well, we'll dive into the 5 questions now. So the first one is, why do you write?
Because I can't talk about my job, really, is the main reason I started writing. Especially as a woman in this industry, that's pretty rare to have a female exploration geologist. There's not many women on remote sites. And when you come home and go to the pub, you can't really talk about what you do because it sounds so ludicrous compared to people's normal jobs. People don't really like it when you talk about your adventures. So I kind of clammed up for 30 years. And then I thought, well, maybe I could write about it instead because I've got all this stuff in my head. And so I started writing and taught myself to write. And it's really gone from there.
So are the stories sort of loosely based on things that you encountered in real life?
Yes, very much so. I mean, in each book I'll throw in an adventure, which didn't necessarily happen to me, but may have happened to people that I know. And most of the countries I've given generic names for African countries and South American countries. They aren't real names, but what I've done is used all my 30 years experience of culture, bureaucracy, just adventures, because I've worked in several countries with civil wars. So I've used a lot of the experiences that I've had and that other people have had in order to fill in the background of the books. There's quite a lot of corruption because that's how most of these countries operate. So the adventures are sort of based around real backgrounds.
Wow. And when did you start writing?
I started writing seriously about 5 years ago.
Okay.
But I have had full-time jobs, so that slows me down a bit.
Yeah. And so are you traditionally published or self-published?
No, I'm self-published. I couldn't find an agent who wanted to publish classic adventure stories, and so I decided there wasn't any point. I think I sent queries to quite a lot of thriller agents, and they just said, we don't do that sort of thing. And when I'd had that sort of thing a few times, I realized that I was being dissed. So I decided I'd better publish my own books.
Yeah, well, more fool them, because I've definitely seen books in that genre sell very well. I know a couple of authors.
mine are doing pretty well at the moment.
Yeah.
Nobody wanted to know. They wouldn't even read them.
Oh, well. So question number 2 is, how do you write? So do you plot your stories out beforehand or just see where the story takes you?
I'm a pantser,
right?
But I'm a sort of, I do a bit of plotting in the middle when sometimes I get lost. I generally know the beginning and the end, and then the middle is a bit of a mystery. And when I get to the middle, I get a bit grumpy, and then I start trying to plot the odd chapter out and figure out how I get to the end. But I don't, yeah, I can't plot it the whole way because I don't actually know what's going to happen.
Yeah, fair enough. And is there a particular set of software that you use, like Scrivener, Word, Vellum, that sort of thing?
I've tried using Scrivener, but I find I lose my way with Scrivener with all those paragraphs, and I get them confused in the dashboard. And I don't know. I kind of like Word. I know that's not very fashionable, but I just like having all my document in order in one document, and I find Word to be the best for that. And also, Word will read my work back to me, which I do quite often with dialogue to make sure they sound realistic.
Yeah, I like doing that with a run through in when editing. So
Yeah.
if Pure reads it back to you, because it obviously has a bit of a robotic voice, if you know if it's going to work well
Well,
or
you can
not.
hear something peculiar and you think, what was that? And you look back on the page and find you've made some sort of typo that you haven't noticed, or that you've put a sentence in twice, or it's just something you don't really notice when you're reading it yourself.
Yeah.
And I do most of my own editing. I use Pro Writing Aid for the first major edit, which picks up all sorts of things like repetition and overused words and peculiar grammar. But sometimes I find it a little bit unhelpful because it doesn't really get my English creative writing terribly well. So I have to leave some of it out. But I have found it to be fantastic, and it's a great software. I think it's very good value too.
Cool. Yeah. Okay. And is there a time and place that you prefer writing?
When I'm unemployed. As an exploration geologist, I do have a lot of downtime, and so I've written most of my recent books being unemployed. I have a full-time job at the moment, but luckily there's a sort of month's hiatus, so I'm using that to write my 7th book and the last in the series. So that's kind of handy.
Nice. Okay, well, question number 3, you sort of somewhat answered, but it's are you a full-time author? If you are, how did you get there? And if you aren't, what steps are you taking to make it happen, if you want it to happen?
I'm not sure I want to be full-time. I still like to work, and my jobs, for instance, at the moment I'm working in northern Brazil in a remote site with no cell coverage, and that's the sort of place you could base a book of any sort where adventures can happen. I find mobile phones to be a bit of an intrusion on adventure because you could always ring someone and get rescued. So the reason I set the Sam Harris books in the 1980s up to the 2000s was because I could write adventures that realistically didn't have mobile phones or computers in.
Yeah.
And as the last book has now got both mobile phones and computers, and it's a totally different book. So I think, that's really, it's quite hard to write adventure with a mobile phone.
Yeah. So once your thriller series is up, do you plan to write more books or maybe a different genre? Or?
Yes, I have a standalone that I'm desperate to write, but I've been keeping it and forcing myself to finish Sam Harris first. So it's my treat to myself when I finish the Sam Harris series to write this book about Ireland. It's going to be called Rebel Green. And it's about the Green family who go to Ireland at the beginning of the Troubles and live in Southern Ireland. And it's about what happens to them and how they get involved by mistake in the Troubles.
Nice. Sounds cool. Okay, question number 4 is, what mistakes do you think you've made and what have you got right?
What mistakes have I made? I don't know. I kind of bumble along. Everything's a mistake. I don't really know. I mean, I have more success than I was expecting. Okay. I think I'm not terribly good at promotion. And I did have the covers in the beginning weren't good enough. And now I think they're too thriller. Okay. So that may be a mistake. I may need to change them if I ever meet someone who understands what I write. But basically, yeah, I don't think there's too many mistakes. What was the rest of the question? Sorry.
What have you got right?
What have I got right? I seem to have hit a nerve with both female and male readers who want to read an adventure where it's not all about billionaires and blondes with huge boobs and explosions.
Yeah.
They want to read a thriller that sounds like they could be in it, and the characters are believable. And one of the things I did from the beginning was my goodies are not all good and my baddies are not all bad. And I think people like proper characters that sound like you might meet them in the supermarket or, down the pub. So I think that's been something that's got me more readers. But because I don't have explosions and boobs, a lot of people pick up the books and hate them and give me 1-star reviews because they say they're crap because they haven't got enough adventure. So, or thriller. But so in a way, I've painted myself into a corner. I guess that's a mistake. But in another way, I've got very loyal people that read the whole series. So I guess that's a positive.
Yeah. Okay. And question number 5 is, what's your final piece of advice for authors starting out in indie publishing?
I've done about 1 billion courses, most of them free. And I would really recommend that in the beginning, you go heavy on editing. So you pay a developmental editor and you listen to what they say, because a lot of indie authors I've read have obviously not had a proper edit. And I think that puts readers off, and it's putting readers off indie books. That there are so many books out there that are not very good. So, my real advice is to get help in the beginning until you feel able to do the things yourself. Like I feel able to do most of the editing now, but I still have a copy editor and a proof editor. I still use beta readers to tell me where I'm going wrong in my stories. So I think trying to do it all by yourself, for some people, may be a mistake. So my advice would be, don't go it alone too soon. Get yourself ready first and be prepared to rewrite things and republish books. If people notice mistakes or if the story is not strong enough, don't feel like it's your only time. When you publish it the first time, you can take it down and you can rewrite it. And in fact, my 6th book was my first book, and it was only after about 2 months I realized that it was part of a series and that I hadn't really said everything I wanted to say. So I took it down and started at the beginning, and I only published it again in September. So, no mistake is fatal. The audience is massive. So, you've maybe 20 people have read your book. It's not the end of the world. Start again. So that's what I would say. Never be afraid to try it again and to keep trying and to keep making it better. Every time somebody says something's wrong with my book, I'll have a look, and if they're right, I'll change it and I'll upload it again. So I just hope that that my writing gets better, my books get better, I get a better audience. But I never take any criticism to heart. I always check and make sure what people are saying is correct, and then I keep going.
Yeah, well, that's strong advice. And that's your 5 questions up. Thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you very much. It's been fun.
That's it for this week's Self-Publishing Spotlight. Don't forget that you can get your free self-publishing resource kit at selfpublishingformula.com/starter kit. And if you want to appear as a guest on this show, send us brief details about yourself and your writing at selfpublishingformula.com/spotlight-guest. I'm Tom Ashford, and I'll see you again next week.